Sorry. Right, let me just do one other thing. So basically, in this particular, assignment, what we are looking at discussing is, let me just go back on this. So now that the assignment brief from Ascentis is available, what we want to be able to do is wrap up this unit. This is a graded unit. There are some grade descriptors on certain criterias. And obviously the equal opportunity and diversity unit, the word count required to achieve this unit is going to be 2000 words plus minus 10%. So that means you can go up to 2200, but not go below 1800. It's a 3-credit unit, so it's a small unit in terms of what we discussed and covered when we talked about the concept of equal opportunity and diversity. There were 3 main areas that we have covered: prejudice, stereotyping, oppression. And those are now in context of equality and diversity, and what is the role of legislation when we talk about implementing the equality and diversity policy, the discrimination policy, or the Equalities Act in the UK in particular, when we look at this context. Now, what Ascentis has done is created an assignment brief wherein they have required the learners to be able to take up one of the contemporary topics, for discussion. So when we talk about contemporary topic or issues, these are issues which are ongoing and current issues which are affecting people or people in different places. And some of these issues can sometimes also be termed as what are called unresolved issues. I think one of the very good examples which has been taken is the pay gender gap, which is there is a lot of data available on this. I don't know how many of you remember, but a couple of months back, or I would say maybe a year back now, Carrie Gracie, who was one of the chief correspondents for China, she basically, internally made a complaint to the Pay Commission in BBC. She's a news presenter, or she was a news presenter on BBC. And what she said was some of her colleagues having the same title and the same type of role were getting more pay than what she was being paid, and she felt that this pay gap should not be there when we are doing almost similar roles, but in different geographies. So the equivalent, of her, her colleague essentially, who was the chief correspondent for Americas, was getting maybe 1.5 times more pay than what she was being paid to cover when she was the chief correspondent for China as a region. And this is what she had raised initially with regards to the pay gender gap, and she then raised it as an issue, saying that this is an issue which is much wider than how pay structures are in BBC, which is a corporation which is owned by the taxpayer, and we pay TV licensing fees. And she led her complaint and her let's say reasons of unhappiness led to a larger review within the corporation to say that there should not be any let's say disparities in pay between male and females working within the organization, having the same role and the same workload or the same title when they are working for a corporation which is owned and paid for by the taxpayer. And that highlights what is called the gender pay gap. Now, one of the other things that we also noted with George Floyd's movement in America, which was on the news, and there were lots of people and lots of people which supported this movement, Black Lives Matters. And this is something which I think everybody is aware of, is again a contemporary issue wherein, George Floyd, obviously he lost his life, and that, unfair treatment of him when he was, not at fault. And then obviously he lost his life in a way wherein some, obviously some of the white police officers in America were blamed, for mishandling and mistreating him, which basically led to loss of his life. And then, later on, this big movement which took place, which still currently has unresolved issues, and we do get to see this time and again, is the Black Lives Matters movement. So what I'm trying to say here is there are lots. What the assignment brief has essentially asked us to do to cover tasks 1.1 and 2.1, which is basically looking at defining stereotyping, how prejudice is seen in society, and how sometimes oppression leads to negative outcomes. So keeping that in mind, and how do we deal with this, what the assignment brief is suggesting is that you choose one of the topic from these bullet points, one of the topics. It could be oppression of the minority group. There is a lot of data on this. So minority group that we talk about is essentially what is called BAME, BAME, Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic Community in the UK. So there is a lot of data available. You will have to do a bit of research by looking at reading into some of the articles and news articles to be able to collect data. So here in the assignment, what you have to do is choose one of the topics to discuss contemporary issues. What are contemporary issues? Issues which are affecting us or people in different geographic places, and these issues are issues which affect society and the way we live and deal with others in the society, and these issues are unresolved issues. So they could be oppression of the minority group. It could be something like Black Lives Matters. It could be the gender pay gap. It could be masculine spaces within education or healthcare services. Again, when I look at this particular issue in terms of masculine spaces, within our society, what this particular, word or the term masculine spaces essentially means that, is our society male dominated? And, are there certain sectors or are there certain places wherein there is more opportunities given to male, people or males as compared to females? So in those cases is what we define, masculine spaces. So basically, masculine spaces means, we are looking at the male population, and where you generally see dominance in the roles, or in for example certain roles within the sectors where you see males only taking up the roles because these roles kind of let's say they basically, these are roles or responsibilities which basically mean that people are able to exercise their power and kind of use legitimacy to be able to say that, okay, these are roles which only males can do. For example, when you look at armed forces, to a lot of extent, women were not allowed into armed forces, or maybe there were no regiments or battalions of women specifically in armed forces. But yes, when we look at armed forces, women do work within the medical side, on the nursing side, but generally going to the front line and fighting and all that is generally seen as male dominated. So from our point of view, what we want to say is, when we talk about masculine spaces, essentially the term here refers to spaces wherein, or job roles wherein you would generally see male dominated people being present. So my suggestion here would be, so when it says masculine spaces within education or national health service, so one of the areas where you see a lot of male dominated roles within the education is when we talk about physical exercise or PE, or when we talk about sports and fitness within education. You generally see most of the coaches, most of the personnel are normally males. So this could be defined as masculine spaces within the education sector when we specifically look at sports and fitness related subjects. Similarly, in NHS, some areas are generally masculine or male dominated, and that is what this topic would refer to. So here, my suggestion would be to look at picking up a topic on which you can do research. There is a lot of data available, and that topic makes sense to you because you can relate to that topic. So I think the first three, if I look at, are absolutely great topics for you to look into, because there's a lot of data available. I can quickly do a search on Black Lives Matters, the pay gender gap, and if I type BBC next to it, I can take that organization. There's a lot of data in terms of how this has been resolved now in BBC. The pay gender gap has been resolved in BBC. The BBC chairman took a decision and the board took a decision that, there will be no difference in the pay male and female presenters get if they are carrying out the same role and they have the same responsibility of carrying out that role within the corporation. So there is an example available, there is data available, and obviously these topics are topics that we've heard about in the news or in our day-to-day lives, and it'll be easier for you to pick one of these topics to be able to discuss to cover learning outcomes 1.1, assessment criteria 1.1, and 2.1. Now, once you've chosen this topic, if I have to now look at giving you an example in terms of how I would develop this assignment, is basically in this same document towards the end, what I'll go and do is insert a page, insert a blank page, and then essentially start with what topic I've chosen. So if I choose the topic, say Black Lives Matters, in my case, I have a lot of data on it. George Floyd, a recent example. I think there was another incident which happened very recently, wherein I think in Tuscany and again in the US, one of the young gentlemen was killed, and police has been blamed, and again that has led to the same issue and same discussion being done again in America, which is talking about reforms in the police force in particular, and they are related to Black Lives Matters because again a young man was killed, was mistreated by the police, and he was killed, and he was severely beaten. When he was lying, next to the police car, the ambulance reached 20 minutes late, and the officers were seen talking to each other, and nobody, essentially, attending to him. And the A&E services also, ambulance and fire services also reached late. And by the time he took them to hospital after a couple of days, I think after 2 days of treatment, he succumbed to his injuries, and he was very badly beaten and mistreated by the police. So again, there are lots of things which are available in terms of creating a bit of a background. So if I take this topic, for example, to discuss contemporary issues on the assignment, what I would do is contemporary issue, and this is what I would take as a topic. And then I would start with a bit of an introduction on this contemporary issue. Why is this an issue? So introduction of this contemporary issue is what I will do. I will write maybe about 30 to 50 words, or say 50 to 70 words to discuss this issue in a bit of detail. But when I start discussing this issue, what I'm also going to bring across is theory, which is the three main aspects which are covered in task 1.1 and 2.1. I'll talk about prejudice. I'll talk about stereotyping. So stereotyping, and I will talk about oppression. So what is the component of oppression here? The oppression by the police without listening to any sort of, or without, in this case, giving any chance for the defendant to speak or let him speak, put his case forward. They basically took a single-sided decision, and obviously, overpowered that in this case, the person, and obviously because of which the person died. So these are three bits which I will include in the theory. After putting in my introduction of 50 to 70 words, I'll discuss each of these again in 50 to 70 words, each of these minimum, by talking about maybe giving the definition of these three main terms. And then towards the end, what I'm going to do is do a detailed discussion on this particular topic, which is the race and the law and the development of Black Lives Matters as a campaign which has happened. And this is something that I'm going to do, discussion of this topic, in 300 to 500 words, detailing out what is the law or what are the changes now being introduced specifically after the Black Lives Matters movement started, and how this is now changing the outlook, or maybe what kind of an effect it is happening on the regulation and the law which is being introduced in order to bring police reforms within America. Now, if you feel this context is American and you want to look at something which is more in the UK, then my suggestion would be to choose a topic like pay gender gap, which is basically, you can take up an example of BBC. You might also look at the oppression of the minority minority group. And this is again something that you can relate to within the UK. And when we look at Black Lives Matters, there is a lot of there is a big movement which happened in Liverpool, the slave trade and some of the statues and other bits being destroyed. So there is a lot of data available essentially that you can do a research on. And I would suggest do a good research of about an hour or so, note down a couple of websites, read a couple of articles on these websites, and then summarize that to the contemporary issue or the topic that you're choosing to discuss for this particular part. Now, within this topic that you have taken, and the way I would have started, as I mentioned to you, you start with the definition of these three terms. Then you give examples of how prejudice has come into, or how police officers were prejudiced towards George Floyd, what was stereotyping. So you have to relate it to this particular topic that you are discussing. In my case, as an example, I'm talking about Black Lives Matters. And then why have you chosen this as a contemporary issue? Why has this become a contemporary issue? So when you talk about Black Lives Matters, this is not something which is new. But if I look at Black Lives Matters and do a bit of research and reading on it, this is a movement which was started, and if I go to Wikipedia, just to look at reading about it, and just to give you an example, and if I just share this screen now, just to give you an example, and if I look at going into just Wikipedia and say, okay, what is Black Lives Matters as a movement? It'll give you a history and background into when it started, how it started, what are the key people involved in this movement, and how this movement has grown over the years. And obviously when the death of George Floyd happened, how it further flamed this particular movement in terms of looking at police reforms in the US. So here it'll give you a journal history of what this movement is all about, and this will give you data that you would be able to use and write into your into your essay, which is basically the assignment, and that would help you give or develop arguments which are required for you to cover these bullet points. Now, because it says 1,000 words, that is what I have done, and I've given you some suggested limit that when you start, you're probably writing about 50 to 70 words, and about 50 to 70 words, 50 to 70 words, 50 to 70, and then looking at, I would say, between 500 to 700 words. So 500 and roughly about 280 here makes it about 880, about 1,000 words if you exceed. So this is how you would cover this particular task, which is 1.1 and 2.1. or for the first part of the assignment. But again, the bit which I would emphasize on would be that you have to look at reading on that topic so that you have enough data available. And the best would be to look at choosing a topic on which there is ample data available on the internet, and that would allow you to extract some part of the important points, include the theoretical part, which is going into our discussion on the learning outcome 1 and 2 presentation, wherein I've covered them in a good amount of detail, talking about what is prejudice, talking about, what is stereotyping, and then also talking about, oppression. So if I just briefly show you the slide in terms of, what the bits I have covered, you would be able to see that that is something that you can fall back on to cover the theoretical part. So this is the learning outcome 1 presentation, and as you would see that I've covered in after the key terminology, bits and pieces related to what is oppression, what is stereotyping, and what is prejudice. So these are all related to what are called indiscrimination, and discrimination is categorized into 3 different types: stereotyping, prejudice, and labeling or oblique oppression. And there is good amount of material that you can cover from a theoretical aspect by referring to these slides and the 2 handouts which are there on Moodle, which help you understand these topics quite well. And that would allow you essentially to cover the first part of your, assignment brief, which is addressing task 1.1 and 2.1. Any questions on this so far? Okay, the second part that we are looking at is it talks about explaining the philosophies considered for the origin of equality and diversity. Now, if you recall, there's a handout which I've given in learning outcome 2, which in learning outcome 3 rather, which basically talks about the origins and principles of equal opportunity, essentially. So if you refer to the presentation, which is learning outcome 3, and then refer to the handout, which is on Moodle, which basically talks about the origins of that theory, and it would essentially give you a good idea in terms of what has to be discussed. So here, the command verb is explain. That means you're looking at explaining the 3 theories or 3 philosophies which were primarily discussed. I don't know how many of you recall, but it was primarily discussed in learning outcome 3. And that is what you would need to do to cover this particular task. So when we talk about the origins of this theory, there is some background which I've covered in the slides. And then what I've done is basically explain the 3, philosophies. And that is what you would need to look at, primarily talk about in terms of the 3 philosophies on the equality of opportunity, which are required to be covered in this particular, task. So we would look at things like, some of the philosophical perspectives like egalitarian view, which is one of the philosophical views in terms of treatment of people basis their gender, their race, religion, and economic status. And, what you would need to do is just cover these 3 theories, which basically are 3 philosophical aspects of equality and equal opportunities theories in about 300 words in summarizing. Then the next criteria is define diversity. This is something which is pretty simple to do. And if you're on the same slide, I have covered what does diversity mean? What does diversity mean in terms of society? What is the definition of it in relation to health and social care? And when we look at the person-centered approach, the 6 C's of care, and then the principles of person-centered approach, they all take into account how diversity is implemented or is a part of day-to-day working within the National Health Service. And this is something that you would be able to discuss in about 100 words in task 3.2. The last assessment criteria talks about providing examples of positive and negative practice and the role of legislation in maintaining equal opportunity and diversity within the society. So here you're going to be looking at discussing again with an example, what is the impact of legislation? How does law or an act which has been introduced in help in delivering equality within the society? So when we talk about one of the first presentations that we did on the discussion on the unit, I took an example of wheelchair access within a public sector organization. So when you go to government offices, there is clearly access for disabled, and mostly all government buildings will clearly would have clearly visible signs to depict that wheelchair access or people on disability with wheelchair access have been, have the opportunity to access the building through lifts or ramps. And that is where what they try and do is when a government office tends to, put this, there is, enough information which is given primarily on the website in terms of signposting. And then obviously when you're at the premises, it basically has those facilities like access to disabled toilets, lifts, wheelchair lifts, things like that, to be able to allow people with disability to come into and participate or come for whatever reasons they are coming into the office, to visit a public, public office. Now, what is the impact of legislation or role of legislation? It basically creates what is called an equal playing ground or provides equal opportunities, in particular to people who have, disabilities. And that is what you would need to explain with an example, because it talks about analyze. That is where you need to take a particular act, which is what I've shown in the presentation as well. So there are lots of different acts that you can choose. But again, in order for analysis, because it talks about 600 words, you might have to take 1 or 2 acts, which could be any of these acts that I've mentioned: Equality Act, the Gender Recognition Act, or the Civil Partnership Act, the Human Rights Act. You need to take 1 or 2 of these acts, explain what is the act, and then talk about what this act essentially helps enables in the society and how it does away with discrimination is what you would need to cover. So because it is analyzed, that is why analysis needs you to quote examples or discuss positives and negatives of it, and then towards the end quote an example to cover the analysis, and that is what would be required to and do in this task. So you'll have to take one or two acts that I've listed on the slide, and these one or two acts essentially would then allow you to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of these acts, why they were introduced, and then how they help in implementation of equal opportunity and diversity at a particular workplace. That is what you would be required to do in this particular task, which is task 3.3. Now, as always, what I'm going to do is send you a copy. I've provided you a copy of the assignment brief already. But what I'm going to do essentially is send you or share with you a sampler, and that sampler essentially would then allow you to look at how you would maybe choose a topic, discuss some of the assessment criteria around 1.1, 2.1, and then look at addressing some of the other tasks which are given in the assignment brief. I would suggest for this that the best thing would be to primarily look at submitting this assignment. Today we are on the 4th. I would suggest that you should be looking at submitting this assignment by the 15th of March, and that would be so that we are able to assess it, mark it. If there are things and changes required to be done, then you can be given feedback, which you can obviously look at attempting, and then make a final submission by the 21st. Is that okay?
Right, but we still have extra 2 before this one. So are we going to leave those ones and do this one or what?
No, this is a assignment discussion. So you're going to, Jessica, so you're going to essentially do this assignment parallelly, but obviously we are going to start a new unit this week on Friday, which will be looking at a new unit and a new learning outcome in that particular unit. So that will be separate, and this particular assignment brief discussion that we've done, you'll have to work on the assignment in your own time and then submit it by the 15th.
Okay.
It's all right.
Is that okay? No worries.
Yeah.
Any other questions, anybody else on this particular, topic?
The second part you explained, I don't really get it, but I get the first one because I was.
Okay, the third part is
in the car.
Okay, the first part is you have to choose a topic and then go about doing these, by covering the theory. In the second part, basically, when I say second part is, these are simple tasks which have been given from the assessment criteria on the unit. So the first part talks about the 3 philosophies that you have to cover, which basically discuss about the origins of equal opportunities, why this as a concept came about, when we talk about equal opportunity and diversity. So there are some 3 theories which explain the origins of, the concept of equality and diversity. And there is a handout which I've given on Moodle, which I would suggest that you read. So these are theories, and you have to basically summarize them in your own words. So each theory, you'll probably put about 100 words, and they would help meet this criteria. Define diversity. It's a very simple task. You have to define the term diversity, talk about what does diversity mean, definition of the word diversity, talk about what does it mean to us in this society, and maybe give a very small example, and that would be 100 words. And the last part, as I've explained to you, because it is analysis, you have to take at least 2 acts like the Human Rights Act, the Equal Opportunity Act, or the Equality Diversity Act, and then explain the positives and negatives of it, why was the act introduced, and then give an example of how does this act actually help in promoting equal opportunities within the society. And a simple example that I mentioned here was in the first learning outcome that we discussed about wheelchair access. So there are certain such examples that you can pick out and basically discuss in relation to a legislation like Human Rights Act. So in Human Rights Act, there are 13 articles. There's a PDF handout which I've uploaded on Moodle, which talks about the Human Rights Act. you can choose one of the articles of Human Rights Act, which is like Article 8, which basically talks about that this was introduced because if there are families of people who are outside the UK, then they want to have a reunion. And if your parents, say for example, live abroad and they are old and they are frail and they need help, under the Human Rights Act, Article 8, you are allowed to have a family reunion in the UK, and that is allowed as per the courts. And this act basically explains the role of legislation, that how equality and diversity can be promoted within the society, and what is the role of government in introducing this legislation, and how this is then implemented by the power of the courts, and then it allows families to have a reunion in the UK because of this particular circumstance of Article 8, which is under Human Rights Act. So you'll talk about the advantages, disadvantages, give an example, and that would cover the analysis part of it for the task 3.3. I am essentially going to send you a sampler in any case, and the idea of sending you the sampler would be for you to look at that sampler in terms of how it has been done, and then choose a topic of your interest from here, and then follow it through in the assignment.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions, anybody?
No.
Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. So for those of you who have not attended, I will make sure that you get a copy of this recording, and then the sampler I will send across on the email to you, so that this unit is looking at now being a submission of assignment by the 15th of March. And then we'll meet up as always in the class to start the next unit this coming Friday.
Okay. Are you sending the record on your WhatsApp or Moodle?
Yeah, I will send it on WhatsApp. This particular session, actually, this is a good question that you're asking me, but let me show this to you quickly. So if you go into, say, for example, the YouTube, which I've explained maybe earlier as well. So if I open YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/UK Versity Online, this session and all sessions I normally broadcast live. So what will happen is, if you are able to go on to the session, you are going to be able to see this session being broadcasted live, and there will be a recording available here as well on YouTube channel.
Okay, all right. But please send it on WhatsApp.
What I will also do is, if required, I will send you a link of this recording on the WhatsApp group as well in a couple of minutes as it is available, and that should allow you to have a copy of this for the purposes of revisiting the session.
Yeah, because if you send it on WhatsApp, it should be more easier, because when doing assignment, if there's a part you are confused, you can still just click on the recording and listen to some of the explanation and teachings that was there.
That's perfectly okay. No worries. I'll get this across to you, on the WhatsApp link as well in a couple of minutes just after the session.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Good stuff. So thank you so much for joining in, and I will see you this coming Friday, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.